board. There we go. And so finally, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker today is Alicia Sanchez. She is a passionate advocate and social entrepreneur committed to guiding leaders and organizations to foster a culture of inclusion. She currently serves as an assistant dean of students and is the director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at Wichita State University. That's right, she's joining us from Kansas. Alicia obtained her master's degree in business administration from Friends University, and she is currently a doctoral student in the higher education leadership program at Wichita State University. She is a past board chair of the Wichita Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and she currently serves on several nonprofit boards. Out of everything she has achieved, her greatest accomplishment is being a mom to her son, Declan. So again, so pleased to have her here. So Alicia Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate that warm welcome and good morning, everyone. It's a little later here in Kansas. It's 11 a.m. So I've had a little more coffee than you, if that is your choice of drink, but really excited to engage in this conversation this morning. So I'm going to share my screen and get underway here. All right, just a thumbs up. You see the screen okay? Excellent. All right, just making sure technology works until it doesn't, as we all know. So again, welcome. I really do appreciate you attending this professional development opportunity. Certainly professional development alone does not change, but certainly, behaviors, it's about engaging in today and implementing what's taught and being willing to continue to learn, to grow. That's how we make tangible change, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion work. That's how we're going to move things forward. So anytime as a part of inclusive growth strategies or any of the other work I do, we have engagement guidelines that really serve as kind of a guide for our conversation and our time together. So you saw at the beginning, right, I am a catalyst, a conversation catalyst. Really someone to hear to kind of engage and spark conversation. I've done a number of these trainings and workshops. And so while you might see, well, she has the right to halt the discussion and maintain order, what's happening today, really just an opportunity. I want us to be able to engage in good dialogue. And I can't imagine this group will have to do that, but let me put that warning out for you all. I want you to embrace being reflective. Again, our knowledge level may be very different, and so I want you to really think and process the information that I'm sharing today. Pause. We use the acronym WAIT. Why am I talking? Why am I not talking? So if you're someone who can take up some space in a room or in a meeting, challenge you, be more reflective and think before you're sharing out or responding. And if you're someone who's a little more reflective, I challenge you to lean in. And challenge yourself to speak up and share some of the thoughts and sentiments that are on your heart and mind. One mic, certainly we're a relatively larger group this morning, and so want to make sure that we hear from everyone. Certainly, feel free to unmute at any time, and if we have too many people unmute, we'll call on individuals. Land a plane. So I am your Delta flight attendant, if you will, pilot. So whatever that thought or comment is, use the language that you have, get that thought out, that comment, your question out. Now, if for whatever reason it's language that is dated, or I might offer some alternate language for you as well. But want you to use the language and get that thought or question out this morning. Assume good intent in a time when we're quick to call people homophobic, racist, sexist, sexist. Right, there's a lot of things. I want you to assume good intent in our conversation. It goes back to the level of knowledge and awareness that we have on this topic around microaggressions. Certainly, that does not mean that freedom of speech is freedom from consequences. Again, you might work with someone or have a informal partnership with the organization or someone on the call today, right? And so that you might say something that impacts them. And so we want to be mindful of how we're engaging with one another. Stories stay, lessons leave. So we'll have an opportunity to share some personal examples throughout our training. We want the concepts and the principles that we're teaching and you're learning to leave. I want you to share that with others. But those stories, if we happen to use a specific name or a person or example, we don't want that to leave the space for gossip, certainly. And then lean into discomfort with grace. certainly, again, as you navigate and you're challenged, if, thinking about some of these examples and things that have impacted the work that you do, we want you to lean in and really push through. That's that space where we're a little uncomfortable sometimes, but where real learning can happen. And then continue the dialogue with others, certainly. So as we leave today, hopefully if you've met a new colleague or a friend on the call, continue to engage in the conversation. So I know a lot to take into consideration as we navigate through, but I also want us to just take a minute to place our cell phones on silent. If you're like me, you might have a laptop and your desktop computer open, your cell phone, right? So close some of those tabs. I really want you to be mindful and to be present in this space today. You're giving about 90 minutes of your time to this conversation. So really want you to be present with me today. And so we'll take a few deep breaths just to prepare to engage. I won't walk you through a whole mindfulness session by any means, but I think it's helpful. If you're like me, navigating through traffic, trying to get your computer to work, all those things can really bubble up and make it a little frustrating for us. So I'll walk you through. We'll take 2 deep breaths on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Inhale and exhale. We'll do one more. 1, 2, 3. Inhale and exhale. So again, I would encourage you to look into mindfulness. It is a great way to really be able to prepare, engage in conversations that maybe you're comfortable or uncomfortable in, but allows you to bring your whole self to the table, to again, be willing to grow, learn, and share. So we'll delve right on in and want to give you some common language, right? We're here to talk about microaggressions, certainly a term that is becoming much more popularized. We've seen that is defined as brief, common, verbal, behavioral, environmental indignities. So whether it's intentional or unintentional, certainly, right, we want to be mindful that these are things that can communicate hostile, derogatory, negative slights, right, that can impact marginalized communities. When we think of the word micro, people will often say, well, that must mean it's small, that it's minor, and it's not an impact. But the micro really means person-to-person interaction. Where we think about macro, we're thinking about larger systems, systemic issues, right? We think about healthcare systems, education, criminal justice, so on and so forth, right? Those macro aggressions are impacting larger systems. So we think about the micro. Certainly. I think I make sure just a friendly reminder, if you're in here, unless you have a comment, make sure you stay muted. I know it's easy to unmute there. So again, when we look at these microaggressions and we see them, right, they may be statements that affirm or repeat stereotypes. They can position the dominant culture as normal and a minority culture as unusual, and can dismiss someone's humanity. So we want to be very mindful about how we engage in conversations, and certainly thinking about the emotional and psychological damage. For some individuals, right, I will say we all can experience microaggressions. Now, the rate at which we experience them certainly is going to vary. For some, it might be, right, you experience one every couple months. For others, it's multiple times per day. And so certainly, and for some, they've been fortunate, they've not necessarily experienced a microaggression or didn't have the language to really call out what it was that they were experiencing, certainly. And so really thinking about how we navigate with different communities, because microaggressions show up a little differently depending on different identities as well. I have a short video. Let's see if it will play for me here appropriately. I'm gonna stop my screen just to make sure that I get the correct one playing and have subtitles on. So give me 2 seconds to get this loaded for you. So this video I will offer just gives you a high level introduction of microaggressions. I will say if you find yourself kind of giggling or laughing, it's okay. And then we'll talk about it. So here in a couple minutes, I'll pause and after the video and allow you to share any thoughts, comments, things that might come to mind for you in watching the video. So let me get this queued up.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Yeah. Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's get a small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap! Beware, Jack the Ripper! Bloody hell! Pip pip! Cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
All righty. So again, perhaps you've seen this video before. Others of you, I love when people are in camera, you can see reactions. So thoughts, comments, things that are surfacing for you after watching this short video clip. And feel free to unmute. Okay, so,
Darrell was in the comments saying she loved this video.
yeah.
It just felt so like, oh my gosh, you did not just say that. That was my reaction. So I laughed, but it was like, you didn't just say that.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like, wait, did this just happen? Certainly. I see Olga, you have your hand up if you want to unmute.
Yeah. I mean, like it just like it was mentioned, it does get comical, when she kind of like what we use that term, like they clap back real quick. But it's really relatable, especially when you don't, when you have even the slightest inkling that you're not, like quote unquote American, that people will try and do that whole nope, but where are you from? Like what are you kind of situation, even though you were born in the US. And maybe because I'm used to it as well, because I'm Latina and people want to know where what I am from. I'm like, I'm from LA. I don't like, oh, you mean where my parents are from? So yeah, it's, I wish it didn't happen, but I guess, you can either do what she did or I guess kind of what I've been used to over the years is just telling them, yeah, my, heritage is from El Salvador and that's it, just leave it at that. So I wish I could do what she did though. just do what she did. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Blanca, I see you have your hand up as well.
Thank you. Good morning. It just, I think it brought back, similar to Olga at this point, I think I'm used to that kind of questioning, which is sad because you just desensitize in a certain way. But for many years, it did make me super uncomfortable. And I couldn't place it. And this was prior to even having the concept of a microaggression and being able to put a label to what that is, because it happened all the time. You just like, why do people have to comment like that? I think that's what I would, think about. And the sad thing is, yeah, the desensitization so many times that you're just like, yeah, whatever. It's another day. And I think probably now I might be a little more ballsy at this point in my life. I might do something really ridiculous like that, especially with a stranger.
Yeah, no, excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. All right, we have two more. I want to be mindful of our time, but I'll go to Alberta. Hope I've said your name correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you said it correctly. That's okay. I think it's a good way to kind of shift that power dynamic too, because I think a lot of the time we normalize white folks in that kind of space, and we're all immigrants in this lands, in North America, in Canada, and so understanding, just creating that atmosphere where you have to really think about what you're saying and what you're implying of people, and recognizing that we all live here, we all belong here, and we all immigrated here in some capacity, and we kind of need to respect that. And yeah, so I liked it. It makes me happy to see that. I don't usually do that. I'm from Africa, so it's really hard to I've never had the courage to do that. So it's nice to see it when it happens, because it does kind of shift that power dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. And then Mao.
Good morning. I apologize in advance if it comes out weird. I just don't know. I don't have that. I'm not able to say it in an eloquent way. I'm part of the diversity community at my job also, and microaggression is something that's difficult for me to facilitate the topic. For me as an immigrant, and I was born in Japan, so for me, I appreciate it when people ask me where is your family is from, because then if you notice in the video, he says, oh, I love going to this teriyaki barbecue place, to the girl who's Korean, and teriyaki is a Japanese cultural food. So that's a microaggression, assuming that this one type of food, is something that's relatable to someone who's from a completely different culture. And so in order for that to not happen, I guess, when someone takes the time to say, can I ask you where your family is from? And I'm able to say, yes, I'm from Japan. Then they're like, oh, okay. And then they're able to have more of a conversation that has less microaggressions involved. So, but I do understand if you're born and raised, and then I totally understand, why are you asking me? I'm American, I'm here. So I'm sorry, I don't know, that's complicated.
No, I appreciate it. And I think there is a balance, because oftentimes people don't know don't have the right language or know the language to use to ask a question, right? Oftentimes I think, all right, ask yourself that question before you ask someone else that question to see, because it's a matter of, how do we navigate these conversations? And so my hope is today, we'll provide some tips on ways to engage. And there's sometimes a lack of awareness. And if no one ever addresses it with someone, they don't know what they're asking is problematic. So, right, it's this balance for myself as an educator. I'm almost always in a teaching mode. There are moments where I'm like, nope, I'm not teaching today, right? There's a 20% of people, you're not going to change their mind or educate them, right? So you have to kind of focus on what's the 60% of people that are in the middle that you might be able to move. And you sometimes just a matter of engaging and having those conversations. So awesome. Well, I really appreciate the dialogue.
And Alicia, we did have some comments in the chat.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you wanted to read those. We've got some.
We have some great things in here. Thank you for that. Want to capture all of this stuff. Assuming and profiling, right, is what we've seen happen. Some people have talked about that this happens to me more than we think, and it does. I've had a number of individuals say, gosh, this is the exact experience I've had, and you change out racial and ethnic identity, and it's not isolated to any one, even thinking of multiracial, biracial, certainly. Certainly comical way to address the stupidity of bias, right? That's a lot of times what it really boils down to. Some acknowledgement of rights that biracial ethnic identity with Native Hawaiian and Asian. Wow, I'm surprised you don't have an accent. I get that all the time, certainly. So I certainly relate to that, Brenda. See Blanca engaging. I've got stopped in the street once by some guy, not white, who asked me, "What are you?" That showed me that unintentional othering and biases are not just with white folks. Yes, we all have bias. I'm not sure if that session has happened yet or not, or if that's one that is going to be on the lineup, but a whole conversation around bias of, right, we all exhibit it and it exists regardless of racial and ethnic identity. Let's see, I see where this could be a teachable moment for some. Yep, we talked about that. I love it when they hear me on the phone and they think I am white, and when we meet, they're surprised that I am not. Well, I'm biracial, biracial, so kind of. So no, thank you for those comments. Really, keep this engagement up, right? We're here to learn from each other and share our stories and messages as well. So appreciate the engagement as we go through. So I want to shift, and we've heard several examples around racial, ethnic microaggressions, but would like to see if there are other examples of microaggressions, and again, being mindful, right? Like if there are other examples of microaggressions that you've experienced. So a couple you'll see on the screen here, assuming that an older employee may not be as good as technology as someone who is younger. Men mistaking a man for a company CEO when the female CEO is right next to him. So if you have two individuals, we just automatically yield to one. And again, which this one has come up already in our space, telling your Latina colleague that they're so impressed with her English as well. So you feel free to utilize the chat, or you can unmute. So Ada, I see you have your hand up. I didn't know if you wanted to speak on the video or if you had an example, but I'll give you some space.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Unfortunately, my video isn't working today, but I love seeing everyone's faces. I just wanted to give you some examples because I am a senior, and I'm an RN. So in healthcare, I have been unfortunately hospitalized several times. And each time there is an assumption, and I do have a weight problem, assumption that I cannot move, I have to be retired. And they just ask me that. Aren't you retired yet? Where are you going to retire? So I just say my thing is no, I'm not ready for pasture yet. When my brain cells die, then I'll retire, or my body, one or the other, whichever comes first. And that's a defensive mechanism. Of course, it hurts a lot. It's like, you're looking at me, talk to me, the person. What does it matter whether I'm retired or not? That's your opinion. I'm here for you to take care of me, so take care of me. And I find it even more tragic when I see it in my colleagues. And I do use it as a teachable moment. But there are many things that I hear from everyone. And I'm also, they ask me because I do have an accent where I'm from. And I find fascinating, just I wanted very quickly, sorry, I don't want to take too much time, share how I have throughout my life, not just here, but in England, anywhere. My husband and I have found this, that he's dark, I'm very white, and he's treated very differently, especially in the airports. Anywhere we go, he's looked at as he's an Arab, and we are Armenians, and I am totally sort of accepted, but he, not here so much, but definitely in England and throughout our lives. So this is everywhere. And I don't know how we fixed it, except just keep educating people as much as we can. I think sometimes people mean well and they don't realize it because they want to be sort of say, hey, I want to be part of your, I love your culture or something. But instead of saying it in a nicer manner, that I'm just curious, that where are your parents from? My parents are from England. That kind of conversation, one day, hopefully. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ada. I appreciate that. So a couple things I want to pick up in the chat, and then we got to keep moving so we get through all of our rich content today. Right, so you speak very eloquently, right? So assuming that maybe because of your identity, racial, ethnic, nationality, that you wouldn't, right? And what is it about that? That certainly that comes up. Car shopping, so certainly the dynamic, whether that's around gender identity, and when females go shopping for a car, right? They sometimes, whether it's car shopping or going to the mechanic, certainly there are things that pop up when we oftentimes know more than our male counterpart. Talking about colorism, that's something that is still very real and present, right? Pretty for a dark-skinned person, right? Even compliments that people may perceive as positive can be a microaggression. Growing up, again, another example around, the complexion and skin color, assuming and othering you, that you're not a part of your family because you look different from your parent or guardian. So certainly some different examples there as well. So again, microaggressions can show up in lots of different identities and different spaces, certainly, and so we have to be mindful. Now, there are different types of microaggressions, and give you the lay of the land. So there are what we refer to as micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. And when we think of a micro assault, it's the most similar to what we traditionally think of as overt discrimination, right? So when we think about it can be verbal, it can be nonverbal and environmental. A lot of the examples we've heard today so far have really been around more and verbal. And so when we think about kind of some of these other examples of micro assault, certainly name calling, use of epithets, nonverbal, behavioral discrimination, right? Offensive signs, posters, other visual displays. Certainly as we navigate in this virtual world, which has been fantastic, but in the same sense, people have utilized virtual backgrounds and put offensive and inappropriate backgrounds, fortunately. And so really thinking about how we navigate through that. You look at a micro insult, is a comment or action that communicates insensitivity to or disregard for a person's identity or heritage. So again, thinking it might be a subtle snub. Again, right, it's a hidden insulting message to the recipient. A lot of what we saw in the video, some of it was subtle, but there were some explicit things that were happening in the video as well. But right, sometimes we're just not as consciously made aware of how harmful they are in nature. Again, I think some of those examples of positive things will, you're really pretty for a dark-skinned girl, or thinking about somebody's hair or their identity. Certainly when you are applauding someone with a person with a disability and saying like, well, you're so brave, right? What's that message that sends to them? Certainly. So a lot of different ways that they show up when we think about micro insults. And then looking at micro invalidations, again, not usually there are a comment or an action that ignores or dismisses the thoughts, feelings, or experiences of members of an underrepresented community. After, when President Obama was in office, we heard a lot of people make comments, right? We're post-racial, we've had a Black, we've had a biracial president, things are fine. And certainly many communities would disagree, right? So negating that, telling someone who's younger, if they feel like they're being followed in a store, and they feel like someone's watching them and telling them like, oh no, you're just making it up, right? We're negating the experience of what they're feeling and how their lived experience, and being mindful of that. So again, usually not consciously aware of some of the things that are happening, but have to be mindful of the messages. And so just a very high level of the different types of microaggression. Certainly for our context today, you don't necessarily have to know and determine which type or of specific microaggression category they fit in, right? What saying these things and being mindful of speaking up and calling in people is going to be really important, that we'll talk about later. So looking at some different commonly used microaggressions, there's no shortage of things, depending again on the communities that you serve. A couple examples here, and I apologize, I know this is a little bit small on the screen, right? Those illegal aliens, right? The use of language, that's so gay. no homo, that's so ghetto. That exam just raped me. So being very mindful of how we might use expressions or statements and the messages that they send, certainly. And so want to transition in and look at some different microaggressions against various communities. Certainly, we won't go through every racial or all identities, but we'll give you a very high level. So looking at microaggressions that might be common within the Asian community, right? The notion of destruction of intelligence. So thinking again about, individuals who might commit these microaggressions, complement that I mentioned, right, where something may seem positive, but again, thinking about the intellectual ability of an entire ethnic group can be detrimental, right? We're setting people up to fail if the expectation is that everyone that identifies as Asian must be really good at math, or right, and they may not be really good at math, and that's okay, right? The other notion is for people who do not identify as a part of the Asian culture, they might see several different Asians in their classroom and think, oh gosh, this is going to be a hard class. Look at all the Asians, right? So it works even internal within the Asian community and identity, and external. And so really have to make sure that we're mindful of the pressure to conform and subjects, right? In this example, with description into intelligence, math, and science, and that people feel trapped, right? They may feel like they have to, pursue academic interest or whatnot in one area. And so have to really be mindful of that. We look at, again, the denial of racial reality, invalidation of inter-ethnic differences. We've heard a little bit about that as well, the invisibility. Certainly, right, as with all and many racial and ethnic groups, right, we're not monolithic by any means, right? Different nationalities, different cultures, different practices. And so have to be mindful of that. And certainly you also see a lot of exoticizing of Asian American women and non of Asian American men. And so what is that message then, right? So thinking about how that might impact self-esteem and how it shows up when we think about media, when we think about curriculum, and as we navigate and are mentoring and have mentor-mentee relationships with different individuals, how this exoticizing impacts different individuals. When we look about microaggressions in our African American and Black cultures, so again, there's assumption that someone who's Black or African American is not a true American. There's an assumption that everyone, right, is from X community, and that, right, thinking again the spectrum and the not being monolithic again certainly plays into this. Assumptions of lesser intelligence, thinking that statements that convey color blindness or denial of importance of race. Well, I don't see your race. Well, if you say that you don't see me, you don't see my race, and that's something that's very salient to me, then you don't see me. And so being very mindful of that. There's a lot of assumptions that come around with hiring, negative perceptions of professionalism. Certainly a lot of conversations around hair, texture, styles, natural hair, and so a lot of those different types of things. We see an overrepresentation oftentimes in reporting when it comes to criminal activity, and that people are dangerous because of their Black or African American identity. Again, promotion of myth of mediocrity, treating as a second-class citizen. So different examples of microaggressions in here. So feel free, obviously, if there's anything you have a question, stop me. I reopened my chat. I realized it was minimized, so I want to make sure I capture that as well, certainly, if there's anything. So looking at our Hispanic Latin XAO community, right? So really thinking about, similar to our African American Black community, perceived as less capable, less intelligent, experience microaggressions in the forms of being treated like a second-class citizen as well, right? Criticized by the way they speak, which we've heard quite a bit about, right? Made feel that they're aliens in their own land. Certainly, the stereotypes and generalizations that are made across cultures, certainly, being very mindful of all the different countries that are represented, certainly for someone who identifies as Hispanic, Latin, XAO, and right, encountering microaggressions through lack of individuality. So again, really kind of grouping everyone together as well within that same community. Looking at the Muslim community, so looking and thinking about religious identities and tying even into that, right? So endorsing religious stereotypes associated with portraying anti-American and terrorism. We've seen certainly over the years an uptick, and that still exists very much so. Some social and cultural exclusion, again, being profiled at the airport, encountering hostile environments and experiences from other passengers on the plane. Certainly that's just one example. I'm sure as we talk, we could come up with many other examples. Looking at religious practices, so experiencing microaggressions based on their religious traditions or practices that are oppressive, abnormal, or sinful. So really thinking again about some of those microaggressions that happen in the Muslim community, assumption of one's religious identity as the norm, so that again, in spaces where it's assumed that everyone present is Christian. So we have to be mindful. There might be a significant number of different religious identities, and then the assumption of religious homogeny, right? So thinking that many Muslims who are not Arab descent, microaggressions, right? So which lead to questions and to miss their religious identity. So where there's some things that we have to be mindful of, that we can't assume that all Muslims have the same religious practices or customs. Again, not monolithic, not all the same, certainly. Let's see, Catherine dropped in here. My best friend and his wife have relatives who came from the Middle East, but they're Catholic. Yes, right. So being very mindful of just like anything, we can't make an assumption. And it really goes back to having conversations with individuals and retaining ourselves to work through kind of what we may have, how we've been socialized a little bit through that. When we look at microaggressions against non-heterosexual communities, so being very mindful of homophobic or heterosexist language or terminology. I used a couple of examples on the previous slide of saying, oh, well, that's so gay, or no homo, or utilizing some of those languages, and the assumption that everyone's experience as a part of a non-heterosexual community, it's universal, it's all the same. So someone who, one gay person, one gay person, one person who is trans or gender non-conforming, so on and so forth, right? There are all these other different aspects to it, certainly. And so thinking that obviously there's also some comparisons, unfortunately, to sexual deviance, assumption around child abuse or molestation, and an invasion of privacy. Oftentimes questions that individuals are asked who identify as non-heterosexual are pretty invasive and inappropriate questions. Looking at the transgender community, I know I made a couple of references on the previous slide, but looking again at transphobic or cis-sex language, reinforcement of the gender binary, right? Male, female, man, woman. Again, that experience is universal, that everyone is. I said, right, one transgender person, one transgender person. The dismissal of gender identity, right? For some people, gender identity is fluid. So it's not that binary. And so really thinking about it, and again, seeing some similarities around the denial of privacy and invasive questioning that they experience. I'm going to pause just for a second, just do a quick check-in. Anya, I know I'm sharing a lot of information and talking at you. Any comments or questions or things that may have popped in the chat that I have not picked up that you want to make sure that we bring in this space? And
Alicia, we've just had some comments in the chat.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you're wanting to go through them, but just people commenting on things that they've experienced. So
yeah, no, it's okay. I see one thing in here from Catherine. How can we work together to share more lived experiences and perspectives of others? Media, marketing events, community engagement. I really think, again, it goes back to, you have to be mindful, and we'll talk in action steps as we wrap up today, right, around the balance of tokenization for people. But, you know, if you have, depending on the work that you do and the communities that you're serving, I think it's important that if when people want to share their lived experience, right, it's one lived experience, certainly, but how do you uplift and empower people to have conversations and creating the space to do that? So I think it's a both and when you think about some work that you can do in an organization to uplift and empower and hear lived experiences from many individuals within your group, and then really thinking about how do you then share that external to help individuals. And a lot of it comes down to getting more proximate different communities and identities that perhaps you have not necessarily engaged in. And it's an ongoing thing. It certainly can't be a one and done. So I appreciate that, Catherine. So hopefully that's helpful to you. So looking at microaggressions and health, certainly there's a significant amount of research about the toll that microaggressions can play. Certainly when we think about you know, the micro, it doesn't mean that they're small. They happen often and frequently. As I said, right, we see it with people with underrepresented communities, but across the board, anyone can experience them, right? And they don't always realize what we're saying, and that, so we have to be very mindful that they don't go unaddressed, and that things are being brought to the forefront. Sometimes it's a little uncomfortable to have the conversation. My hope is today that you're taking away some different tips and tricks on how to engage and speak up, whether you experience microaggression, you are the microaggressor, or you're a bystander, right? So how do we help people navigate through this space as well is going to be really important. We look at the impact of microaggressions, certainly, K through 12, post-secondary students, have significant negative behavior in the classroom, right? So when you think about low performance, a shift in overall just engagement, right? If someone is constantly told that, they're not enough, or even if their identity is utilized against them, or right, there are all these things that are going to factor into these long-term effects. And so really thinking about little kids and like, oh, your hair's so pretty, because of your identity. Well, why can't it just be because of how I style it and how I do it? And certainly, and then with all populations, certainly we see negative mental health symptoms, depression, anxiety, high reports of negative thoughts about oneself. There is a correlation between high blood pressure, diabetes, so some significant health conditions that are tied to microaggressions. And so the amount of research that's been done is pretty impactful and frightening at the same time, certainly. And so really thinking about that. I mentioned earlier, right, the being mindful of tokenizing. So the only one in the room, so fear to perform for an entire underrepresented community, or being unequally treated in the classroom or at your job or at home. Certainly, we have students that are individuals in the workplace, right? I mean, in any space, if you're asking, there's this fear of, right, for me as a Latina, so if I do X, Y, or Z, is the assumption going to be that that's how everyone who identifies as a Latina is responding or behaving? And right, if I make a mistake, what does that mean? Certainly. And a quick example, I saw this just yesterday. I was at an open house for my child, Declan. He's in 3rd grade, and was listening to him and one of his other, his partner for his coding class, talking about the fear of, gosh, if we don't perform, people are going to think that we're not smart enough. And there are two, my son's a biracial little boy, Hispanic and white, and the other little boy is Hispanic. But to hear the two of them talk and their fear, and they were the only 2 young men of color that I see, everyone else is white presenting. And I was just like, wow, right. So even at 3rd grade at 9 years old, that thought process and the impact that might have on individuals. So certainly if it's impacting 3rd graders, I'm sure it's impacting us as adults as well. So again, processing some possible responses. There is certainly a lot of things to take into consideration. For some of us, we have become desensitized, right? I heard some of those comments earlier where people are asking about where are you from? But then there's this kind of whole other processing piece that takes place potentially. And so some responses, right? So when you think about, attributional ambiguity, yeah, can't say that word, ambiguity, right? So did that just happen? Am I misinterpreting what just happened? Your response might be indecisive. How do I respond? Do I respond? What should I do? Not really knowing. A time limiting, so really thinking about, I don't want to deal with this right now. So sometimes it's exhausting for people. Denying experiences. Certainly, I'm sure they didn't mean anything by that, right? That wasn't their intent. We're friends. I don't think she thinks that way. Right. There are a lot of different types of things where you think about denying the experience of what just happened, even when it has just happened to you. Right. It won't do any good to speak up. It isn't worth the effort. And oftentimes people think, nothing's going to change. It's always been this way. So why would I do anything to rock the boat? So there's a lot of different types of things. And certainly fear of consequences, which is very real in the workplace and in different organizations. If I say something, for someone in a classroom, right, it might be fear of retaliation or my boss or a colleague. So what does that look like? And knowing that sometimes speaking up is really the best approach to things, but knowing that the retaliation might exist in a space. And so understanding and knowing how that might show up and how to move forward. So again, right, we've talked about just the emotional energy it takes, emotional risk. Certainly, right, there's a wide range of things. And my hope is you don't walk away thinking, gosh, I can't say anything to anyone. I don't think that's probably this group because of fear of saying a microaggression, right? There's emotional risk. Diversity, equity, and inclusion work is hard, it's heavy lifting work. When we think about microaggressions and what we say, it's really just being more mindful of that and how we engage people in conversations. Right? We don't want people to feel guilty about speaking up or wondering, gosh, I should have said something. There's no right way. I think microaggressions there's a gray area that I'm looking for on when to speak up and when to say something, if you're in a meeting and something happens, or if you're one-on-one. And so it depends on the rapport, it depends on the setting. If you're in a team meeting and you know that X person constantly says things that are inappropriate and are microaggressions, there are moments in that space to process and to debrief. Look, so-and-so constantly says this, we just want to unpack it. Or is it a matter of having a conversation one-on-one with that individual and helping understand why what they're saying, and is it just for them a lack of awareness, or do they really have a bias towards a different identity groups? Sometimes we make excuses for friends who commit microaggressions, right? We will justify somebody's behavior and then have a hard time of justifying those ignored, their own feelings and their experiences, certainly. And so we have to be very mindful of the different emotions that can evoke, certainly, right? You might experience someone that has anxiety, anger, fatigue, right? It can take a physical toll, which again ties back into kind of those health outcomes, negative health outcomes that individuals experience through microaggressions. Okay, so I know I have talked at you now for about 30 minutes. I want to give us an opportunity to take what you have learned so far and unpack a couple of different scenarios around some microaggressions. So Stephanie's going to help me get breakout rooms set up here in just a second. I'm going to walk through the scenarios so you know all 4 scenarios. We'll have 2 different rooms working on each of the scenarios, and you'll just kind of process through and tell me how you might handle it. So I'm going to go through them here first with you. And then I'll have Stephanie drop in the scenarios. So then if you need to refer back to them, they'll be in the chat for you here in just a minute, and we'll get the room set up. So our first scenario, you have a more senior employee who always refers to younger employees as sweetie and youngster. A majority of the staff enjoy the endearing names. A small group of colleagues are offended because they've asked the senior employee to stop calling them by those names. How do you handle that situation? So once you're identified in group 1, I'll have you work through and come up with some ways that you might handle that situation. Our second scenario, you're in an organizational meeting and having a conversation at the coffee pot. Everyone is talking about their weekend, and one of your colleagues begins to share their weekend. Your colleague shares that she and her girlfriend finally got time to spend time together. A fellow colleague says, "Can you not share about your girlfriend? That makes me uncomfortable," and then storms away. How would you handle that situation? Third scenario, a constituent comes in and there are only 2 employees in the organization. One of the employees is wrapped up, tied up, and the other is a person of color who is available. The constituent comes in and says, "I don't want to have a person of color handling my affairs." How do you handle the situation? And then our fourth scenario, a fellow colleague is always using the R word, and it's a slur used against communities with disabilities. They feel as though it's not a problem to use the word because they believe it is reclaimed language and they are a person with a cognitive disability. How do you handle that situation? So those are our 4 scenarios that we're getting dropped in. So I'm going to stop sharing. So they've been dropped in the chat here. So thank you for that, Stephanie. So what we're going to do, we're going to give you in groups, 5 or 6 people in a group. We'll get breakout rooms going. Let's see here. Trying to think of. Stephanie, are you there?
Yes, so I have all 8 breakout rooms ready. Did you want me to open them right now?
Yep, and if you want to tell like the who's in group 1 and 2, so hopefully I think you can see the breakout room that you're in, but 1 and 2, you'll work through scenario 1. So if you're in breakout room 1 or 2, you'll be working through scenario 1. 3 and 4, you'll work through scenario 2. And then 5, 6, scenario 3, 7, 8, scenario 4. That makes sense for everybody? Yeah, okay, all right. So well, like I said, we'll give you 8 minutes, we'll give you 7 minutes to work through it. You'll get your 1-minute warning, and then we'll get everybody back here. And then please make sure you identify a spokesperson that will share insights from your conversation and what you came up with. And we'll have each of the groups work together when we come back as a whole. Sound good? Okay, excellent. So Stephanie, if you want to go ahead and open up breakout rooms.
Yep, doing that right now. Oh. Okay, and we're all good now.
Good. A couple more seconds and all the breakout rooms will be closed and we'll come back together and see what everyone came up with. All righty, so 8 minutes either seemed like a really long time or seemed like it went really quick. So I know, I wish we had more time. So want to be mindful. Please make sure if you are not speaking that you're muted. So I know if you came out of the room that you mute so we can hear. Thank you, friends. All right, so rooms 1 and 2, and hopefully you saw which room you were in when you went in and know. So our first scenario, let me pull those back up so I can remember. The senior employee situation when the sweetie and youngster example. So who wants to share insights from your conversation first?
I can share.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
In our group, we discussed like the cultures are diverse, but having set boundaries with using names and not terms. We would say it's important asking for permission before we use those terms, and that's just showing respect for one another. So we thought also that we'd bring the topic up to a supervisor, like if it continued once we try to address it with that staff. And then we just thought like trainings are very important, having staff with more culturally diverse trainings we thought are very important.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone from the other room that discussed this come up with anything different or in addition to? Nope, and that's okay.
Well,
sorry.
The other group.
Yeah, go ahead, Diana.
We were talking about scenario 1, and we weren't sure if we were the larger group or the smaller group that was okay or not okay with the way that they were being called by their senior by the senior employee. But either way, we were kind of just generalizing it, and so we were in agreement with just encouraging those employees that don't want to be called that to maybe bring it up to that senior employee, because he may be not aware of how others are feeling, because he's getting the sense from the larger group that they're okay with it. One of the group members did say that she would have been okay with it. However, there were also others from our group that were not okay with it. So just providing as an employee to another employee, providing them the skills and empowering them to get together with their senior employee to make a meeting and to let it be known, because they may be ignorant to that, the name referring them to. So yeah.
Thank you. All right, scenario 2, who wants to share insights from your group? And to be mindful, my time is catching up with me. So we'll hear just from one group each, unfortunately, for the remainder of these, just so we get through to some action steps, certainly. So scenario 2, the coffee pot and the sharing about your weekend. Who wants to cover this?
Okay, I'll speak from group 3. So we identified strategies such as 1, checking in with the colleague who the comment was made to, asking her how she's feeling, if she's okay, and what action taken next would be helpful for her if she needs support. And then second is to go to speak to the colleague who made the comment privately, and then letting that colleague know that this is an inclusive workplace and that her comment is not appropriate. And then finally, I share that I'm a supervisor where I work, and so utilizing the privilege of being in a position of power, in order to enforce and support an inclusive workplace, that if those situations were brought up, that I also send a message and support that this is an inclusive workplace. And while your opinion is important, you know, the comments made towards others who have different identities different than yourself is that's offensive, is not okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Nothing I would add, so spot on. Our third scenario, dealing with the constituent that does not want the person of color to handle their affairs. Who wants to share insights from your group? Do we have any group work on this one? Or did any group work on it?
Hi, this is Cheryl. Our group talked about it. Well, I actually just shared an experience that I had, and we talked about how we handled it. And because this actually did happen in our organization, but it wasn't a constituent, it was a client that came in. And there were only two of us there to deal with it. We were both people of color. And so they asked questions about how we handled it. And it's just a matter of, you know, trying to stay professional while, you know, having to handle someone who's very insulting and was very racist. We just clenched our hands and clenched our teeth and our fists under the desk and just tried to remain professional the entire time. And then, but we had a very understanding director who helped us talk it through afterwards and did some self-care and just remembered that, you know, in that situation, we had to remain professional, but just, you know, standing our ground and dealing with the emotional effects of it afterwards.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing, and I'm sorry that you had that personal experience. Certainly, right, you know, staying par for the course and being able to, if you are able and capable, right, maintaining the professionalism, everything you've identified. I think the other piece of it is, like, for the organization, you know, depending on the type of organization, you know, is there the potential where you might need to either sever ties with the constituent or the customer, or, you know, obviously it depends on kind of what the relationship looks like. But again, I think reinforcing, if it is an environment that supports diversity, equity, and inclusion, an inclusive space, it might be evaluating the involvement of other people who are not necessarily tied to the same values of an organization. So, and then our fourth scenario.
I can speak for our group. Scenario 4, key takeaways: to not just say what not to say or do, but to also say what to say or what to do. The second takeaway is to speak up, advocate for yourself if that disrespectful term is said to you, or if it's said to someone else and you're preventing further bullying or ignorance down the line. And the third takeaway is to educate others on what that term actually means. And others can chime in if I missed anything.
No, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I think oftentimes what sometimes I've heard, you know, people get stuck and it's a slur is a slur. So whether that it's a part of, and you feel like it's reclaimed, it's, you know, it might be reclaimed from part of the community, but making sure that people are aware, right, language, certain language is not okay in a space, in an organization. So appreciate all of the comments. Right, just some things to take into consideration when you think about the application and how things, specifically how microaggressions can show up. So I want to give you, as we round out our time together, right, some different strategies to think about when responding to a microaggression. Certainly, if you're the individual who experienced a microaggression, paraphrase and ask for clarity. You know, make sure what you heard them say is what they intended to say or did say. You know, I think what you said was, my English is perfect for a Latina. Is that correct? Can you elaborate on what you meant by that? Seems pretty elementary, but sometimes we've gone so far away that we can't just have that conversation. Now, it also depends on the mental space that we're in and how many times someone has asked us those questions. Now, if you experience or overhear and are a bystander, perhaps you'll share your own experience with the person who made the microaggression, maybe perhaps how you challenged the underlying stereotype, or perhaps how you have recognized or know that it's a microaggression. Right?
From last night.
We want people to feel less self-conscious about how they feel. We don't want people to feel defensive and shut down. We want to provide education and awareness, right? So I've overheard you make the comment that all people with disabilities need help. I used to think that too, but then I learned disabilities can be visible and invisible, and we should be open to helping when asked. So again, it goes back to that dialogue. Right, so invite dialogue where you see there are signs. So if you commit a microaggression, right, if someone has a really visceral reaction, right, you might ask them, help me understand what just happened. Certainly we have to respect the vulnerability and emotional risk. And certainly an appreciation and a willingness to engage can go a long way. Certainly thinking about, an apology. They may not be in the place or space to help educate you on why what you said was problematic. It is on you to educate yourself on why what you said was problematic. And so take that time. And again, we all commit microaggressions. We just have to take ownership of it. I'm sorry what I said hurt you. That wasn't my intent, but I'll be intentional about trying to avoid hurting others in the same way in the future. So certainly thinking about how an apology does go a long way. So again, as we wrap up, it's important for us to be mindful of our own biases, prejudice, privileges, certainly, right? Being cognizant of those things and how we show up, even if we are a part of a marginalized community, being mindful of what we say and our language and our behavior, intentional versus unintentional, right? Again, our intent may not be X, but the impact was this. So if an elephant stands on your foot, it hurts, whether it was on purpose or not. We want to make sure that we're mindful of statements that may seem positive can involve stereotypes, and making sure that we're using inclusive language. I've heard that kind of come up in the space during our time today, and really speaking up and calling people in, right? How do we make sure that people don't feel like they're being called out, that we're calling them in, that we want to hear their perspective and their voice and their, right? For some reason, they have learned that language, but how do we help them navigate language, certainly? When we think about cultural humility, right? Certainly with Danielle and I, who's also another trainer with Inclusive Growth Strategies at Conversation Catalyst, right? We think around cultural humility, not cultural competency. Competency indicates an end to something. And humility is really this commitment to a learning and a critical self-reflection, right? So how do we really kind of work to shift the power imbalances and the client dynamics, thinking about institutional accountability, mutual respect, and partnerships that are built on trust? That's really what our kind of this work is about, certainly. So I want to just a quick check in and see if there are questions or things that are coming up into this space. So I'll let you kind of marinate on anything that maybe you thought I would cover or things that you want to ask. But one of my mentors, Dr. Juan Munoz, he's actually now, I think at the University of Houston downtown, he's the president or chancellor, Juan Munoz, but commitment without currency is counterfeit. So when you think about your commitment to working around diversity, equity, and inclusion and making change, right? Oftentimes financial resources are limited, but people power. But what are you committed to doing around ensuring microaggressions are recognized and mitigated? And then what do you need to succeed in that commitment? So that's really my challenge and my ask of you all as you navigate and you do the work, right? Remember, the work happens after today. What are you committed to doing? I always say when I make a New Year's resolution, if that's something that you would do, right? Then I say I'm going to eat healthy, and I'm not doing that because I didn't say this is what I'm going to do to be successful in that. So what's the plan to ensure microaggressions are recognized and mitigated in this kind of as you navigate in your own space? And then ending with a quote: microaggressions are like death by 1,000 paper cuts. So certainly if someone experiences a microaggression, they might experience thousands of tiny little microaggressions a day. And we know what one paper cut feels like. So certainly can be very, very impactful and on us, certainly. So I want to be mindful. What questions, comments, things do you all have? I see Cheryl, yes, we will be able to get access to the PowerPoint. So I will follow up with Tracy and make sure that you have access to some of the slides there for us today. It also has some resources for you. And then certainly if you want to follow up with us as well. I'm going to pause. I know I said I'm going to allow you to ask questions and make comments, and I keep talking. So I'm going to stop talking and see what is in this space that we want to capture that we haven't already. So any questions or comments?
So if you wanted to take yourself off mute, or if you wanted to raise your hand, put in the chat, any of those that work for you, you wanted to comment, yeah, just let us know and we'll let you speak or chat. So just waiting to see if anybody. Okay, and I'm not seeing anything, Alicia.
No, no worries.
Okay.
So I'll just wrap up and just say thank you. I appreciate the engagement. I know we covered a lot of information. I really enjoyed hearing the different stories and experiences. So I just want to say thank you to being vulnerable and willing to share in this space. And I hope that there were a few things that you took away around microaggressions, and certainly don't hesitate to reach out if there's other things that we can do to help you in your microaggression kind of journey and mitigation, certainly. And so I'll turn it back over to Tracy and I'll hang out. So if there are some questions you want to ask in a little bit smaller intimate group, I have a few minutes that I can hang out and stay on the call for you. But Tracy, I'll turn it back to you.
Absolutely. And I think at this time, if we can all give her a round of virtual applause or actual applause. Thank you so much, Alicia, over there in Wichita. Very, very insightful. And as I mentioned before, we are, look at all the hands. We are doing this is the 3 out of 6 sessions. So we do have LGBTQ and inclusion coming up. And so I'll share the video with all of you who signed up, as well as the PowerPoint I'll get from Alicia, and I'll share the flyer so that will all be coming to you. Again, it's Friday. It's 9 o'clock now. It's almost 10:30. So thank you so much for sharing your morning with us. We greatly appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed it and that it caused some stimulation and that it was thoughtful. So thank you so much for enjoying, and have a lovely weekend. Thank you all. And again, thank you, Alicia, for facilitating.
Thank you.
I just want to say, Tracy,